Hey everybody, it's low carb and keto nutrition specialist Amy Berger from 2itnutrition.com, bringing you the one and only keto without the crazy. Today's topic is a big one. It is probably going to be a longer video, but it's just going to take as long as it takes because it is such a big topic. And I have been wanting to do this topic for a while, and I've been kicking the can down the road because I knew it was going to be long. I knew it was going to be kind of involved and complicated to cover it all, but I got to stop putting it off and just get it done. Today's topic: artificial sweeteners. So yeah, that's not a big loaded controversial topic at all, is it? Now, just to clarify, I'm going to use the phrase artificial sweeteners as kind of shorthand, but I am referring to the large general category of any kind of sweetening agent we would typically use on a low carb or ketogenic diet. So I mean basically everything that's not real sugar, or however you want to say it, things like white or brown sugar, agave nectar, honey, maple syrup, molasses, sorghum syrup, demerara sugar, turbinado sugar, whatever, all the sugars, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, all that stuff. Talking about all the other stuff that we might employ on a low carb or keto diet. It could be artificial sweeteners, that is things like sucralose, which goes by the name Splenda in the US. There's all of these compounds and molecules are probably used in your country. If you're watching this from outside the US, they just have different brand names. So the sucralose or Splenda, saccharin, that's sweet and low in the US, cyclamate, which I don't think we use in the US anymore, but in Canada, I believe that's Sugar Twin, or it used to be Sugar Twin. What else is there? The aspartame, which is Equal, or NutraSweet, I think is aspartame. Those are the artificial sweeteners. Then there's the sugar alcohols, which are not, again, I'm using the phrase artificial sweetener as a catch-all term because it's easier to say than, keto sweetener, whatever. Their sugar alcohols are the ones that end in etol, maltitol, mannitol, sorbitol, erythritol, xylitol, sugar alcohols. There's also things like stevia, there's allulose, there's all these sort of new, stevia is not new, but allulose is new, these newer sweeteners. If I use the phrase artificial sweeteners, unless I specify, I mean all of those, the big catch-all category. Now, I do have notes. There's 2 pages of notes, so I knew this was going to be a long video. I will try to get through it in some kind of coherent order. This, like I said, this is a very, very controversial topic. Now, I guess, where do I want to start? First, I will start by saying, I think the first thing that's important to know is that many, many, many thousands upon thousands of people have had incredible success on low carb or ketogenic diets while including these sweetening agents in their diet. Whether any of them, sucralose, saccharin, aspartame, stevia, erythritol, xylitol, sorbitol, whatever. Many, many, many people do perfectly great while using those items, whether it means drinking a diet soda, drinking Crystal Light or some other artificially sweetened beverage, using, Splenda or erythritol in keto baked goods, keto versions of high carbohydrate things. We know that many, many people do great on keto. So with that in mind, sorry, if I look down, it's because I'm looking at the notes. With that in mind, some people find that they don't do so well. And so if you find that for you, having something artificially sweetened or with one of these sort of lower carb keto friendly sweeteners, if you find that either causes you to crave more and more and more sweet, then probably not the greatest idea for you to use them, right? Or Well, now I'm getting ahead of myself. If you find that that keeps the sweet addiction and the craving for sweet perpetuated, probably best for you to like abstain completely from sweet, even if it's fake sweet, even if it's keto friendly sweeteners. So just because many, many thousands of people do perfectly well with them, that doesn't mean that you will automatically do perfectly well with them. So that's really an individual thing. And because of that, I would love dearly for all of us out there, or I don't, us, because I don't really do this, but for the fear mongers out there, I would love if people would refrain from fear mongering and sensationalizing and raising all the alarm bells over this stuff for other people, because it's entirely possible that these kinds of sweeteners are a problem for you, but not for him and her over there. So just because something doesn't work so great for you doesn't mean that somebody else won't have a perfectly fine time with it or them. So, okay, there's lots of people will go into anaphylactic shock if they even smell a jar of peanut butter. Does that mean everyone everywhere needs to stop eating peanuts? No, because some people have no problem with peanuts at all. Same with these keto friendly sweeteners. If you have a big issue, you have a big issue. Don't extrapolate that to mean that every other single person on the planet has the same issue you have, because they don't. Some of them might, yes, not all of them. So, sorry, I should start checking things off here as I go through them. Okay, so that's the fear mongering. If some people will claim that these kind of sweeteners stall them, or they're like kind of a problem for them, specifically if we're talking about keto for weight loss or fat loss, right? People do low carb or ketogenic diets for any number of reasons totally unrelated to weight loss. But let's focus on the weight loss piece for now, and then we'll move into other things. Some people will claim that, as soon as they drop the sweeteners, stuff started moving. I mean, the weight started coming down. I can totally believe that for sure. But my question would be, is it the sweetener per se, or is it what you were using the sweetener in? For example, if you were making a keto cheesecake that had a cup of erythritol in the recipe and you don't eat erythritol anymore, well, that means you're not eating that cheesecake anymore either. So was the erythritol the problem, or was the butter and the cream cheese and the whatever, the nuts in the crust, was it all that extra fat in that product that was holding up the weight loss, or was it the erythritol all by itself? We can't really tell. Same thing if you were whatever sweetener you're using, could be allulose is very popular now. Maybe you were using that in your almond flour muffins and your coconut flour cookies. Well, again, is it the allulose that was holding things up, or was it the half a cup of almond flour you were having with that cupcake every day? And I don't even know that there's an answer for sure here. I'm just saying, don't if this situation describes you, don't automatically assume it was the sweetener. It might be. It might have been. But we don't really know unless that's the only thing you eliminated, because it's very likely that you didn't only eliminate the sweetener, you eliminated the vehicle that you were having the sweetener in. So that's one thing. Let's see. And I gotta say, I wrote a book called The Stall Slayer. There's a link below in the notes that's specifically about helping people break through those fat loss stalls on a low carb or ketogenic diet. And to be honest with you, when somebody comes to me who's stalled, like for a private consultation, I'll do those too, link below. When somebody comes to me for help with getting past a fat loss block, the sweeteners are not the first place I look to. Well, they kind of are, and I'll come back to that. The artificial sweeteners and stuff are not the first place I'm looking at with regard to a stall. It's I'm going to look at the total carbs, so stick a pin because we have to come back. I'm looking at total carbs. I'm looking at the amount of fat they're eating. I'm looking at the fat bombs, the oil in the coffee, the butter, the cream, the fat. I'm looking at how much alcohol they consume, if any. And the bottom line is, when somebody's stalled, I don't ignore the use of these keto-friendly sweeteners, but it's not the top on my list. It's not like the first couple of things I'm going to look at to try to help somebody troubleshoot their stalled fat loss. So again, not saying that the sweeteners are never the problem. They're just not the first thing I'm going to look at when I'm trying to help somebody. So let's see. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to make sense of my notes here. I'll come back to the stick a pin thing, because I said, you know, sometimes they can be the issue, and sometimes they are going to be a place that I look, because I do, if somebody's stalled, I do look at total carbs. And I said at the beginning of this video that the artificial sweeteners are, there's a lot of different categories, and they can have very different effects on your blood sugar and insulin. For example, something like the saccharin and the sucralose and the aspartame are minimal, itty bitty, like negligible, zero effect on most of those things for most people. There's always going to be an outlier. There's always going to be a rare person who's like the one in a million who has a result that like nobody else gets. So I'm not saying it never happens, but for the most part, those sweeteners are so concentrated. They're like hundreds and hundreds of times sweeter than sugar. So it only takes a tiny, like teeny amount of them to give you the sweetness of 2 or 3 teaspoons of sugar. So the amount that you're using of them is going to have almost no effect on your blood sugar and insulin. Contrast that with something like the sugar alcohols, where they do have a glycemic impact, meaning they do affect your blood sugar. And if they affect your blood sugar, they're going to affect your insulin. And maybe not quite like sugar. And within the category of sugar alcohols, there are several different ones. Like I said, the erythritol, mannitol, maltitol, sorbitol, xylitol. And even each one of those has a distinct impact. Supposedly, mannitol and maltitol are some of the worst in terms of having a higher glycemic impact, and something like erythritol is supposed to be the lowest, almost negligible. I mean, again, always outliers. Most people can consume erythritol and see like zero rise in their blood sugar or insulin, zero effect on their ketones kind of thing, if you measure all that. So even within that category, they're different. But if you are regularly consuming products that are made with some of the sugar alcohols that do have a bigger impact, then yes, of course, that could be holding up your fat loss. Because if it's raising your blood sugar and insulin every time you eat it, and you're eating it 4 times a day because it says sugar-free or it says keto on the label, you might be sabotaging yourself and you don't even realize. Because you think, oh, it's sugar alcohol, it's sugar-free. And what was I going to say? And, you know, some of these, we know they have different effects because some of them cause a lot of gas and bloating and loose stools. Some of them don't. So we know that they're absorbed differently. Some of them are fermented in the colon more than others, that's why they lead to the gas and bloating. And so it's like it's very complex, because each one of these sugar alcohols has a different effect, you know, in a test tube or in a rat or a mouse. Then you bring it into the human body. And even though I use the phrase glycemic impact, some of you may not, if you've heard of the glycemic index or the glycemic load, meaning the glycemic index is like how quickly and how much a certain amount of a certain food will raise your blood sugar. And that's all well and good as a general, very general, vague ballpark. The problem is the glycemic impact of something is not 100% inherent to the food itself, the food or the beverage. All of us as individuals have different reactions to the same food. They did a study in Israel a few years back where they had a couple of hundred participants. I think they set them up with CGMs, fed these people all different kinds of meals, and they could see that 2 people or 20 or 200 people could eat the exact same amount of the exact same food and have radically different effects on their blood sugar and insulin. So let's say for that person over there, maltitol really raises their blood sugar. For that person, not so much. So it's all over the place. So it is entirely possible that there's lots of people who can have any and all of these, the stevia, the maltitol, the erythritol, the allulose, the whatever, and do great, get all the results. They're thrilled with how they look, how they feel. And it's entirely possible that there's a whole other group of people who can't, because they can have the same kind of sweetener and they do have a massive impact. So it's really, that's why we can't give blanket recommendations. We can't say that this is going to work for you because it works for him. But this is also why I think I mentioned when I'm helping somebody kind of troubleshoot really stubborn or stalled fat loss, the artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols aren't the first place I look to, but I think I said I do look at total carbs. And total carbs includes those sugar alcohols. The artificial sweeteners, again, you're using them in such minuscule amounts, it's basically negligible. But when you're talking about maltitol and xylitol and sorbitol and stuff like that, it can start to add up. So that's why, my friend Dr. Westman's, Dr. Eric Westman's, his famous page 4 diet, it's also the same food list as phase 1 in the book we did together, End Your Carb Confusion. Dr. Westman, after 20 years of clinical experience helping patients do keto, he recommends counting total carbs. And it's very, very strict, but it tends to work for people who in the past were counting those net carbs, meaning there's net carbs is where you subtract the sugar alcohols and the fiber from your total carb count for the day. If you don't subtract those sugar alcohols, then you are accounting for how your body might respond to them, just in case you are one of the people whose blood sugar does rise quite a bit or whose insulin does rise quite a bit from the maltitol or the xylitol. You're accounting for that if you count all the carbs, the total carbs, meaning you don't subtract those grams of sugar alcohol. If you do subtract the sugar alcohols, this is what turns some of those the keto ice creams or the keto cookies, the keto sort of like protein bars, this is what can bring an item with, say, 24 or 25 total grams of carbs to an item that has 2 or 4 net carbs. So you might be counting 2 or 4 carbs if you count net carbs, not realizing that those other 20 grams of carbs coming from the maltitol or the sorbitol are affecting you metabolically. So they are interfering with your weight loss or your blood sugar control if you have diabetes, or your insulin levels if you have PCOS or something like that. So I'm not dismissing the effect of these things. I just want to emphasize to stop the fear mongering, because some people do fine with these, some don't. If you are having trouble getting the results you want, if you are stalled in fat loss, if you are having trouble getting that blood sugar down or reversing some of these issues that come from metabolic syndrome, hypertension, non-alcoholic fatty liver, gout, migraines, skin problems, and these higher total carb foods, these sugar alcohol sweetened foods, are a regular part of your diet, consider cutting them out for a month and see what happens. Because maybe you are one of the people who is sensitive to it. Okay, that's that. Let's see what else can do. Consulting the notes here. Okay, here's let me I'll start with the gut biome first. You'll hear a lot of the fear mongering around some of these things, especially the artificial sweeteners as opposed to the sugar alcohols, comes from people freaking out about changes to the gut flora. Your gut bacteria, all the little buggies that live in your colon. I think anyone who claims to have any insight as to what an optimal or healthy or ideal gut biome is blowing smoke up your gut biome. I mean, the fact is your diet, barring some kind of parasite or some kind of overt sickness, your diet does determine your gut flora. How can you even speak about an ideal gut biome or an optimal gut biome? Should someone who dwells, a tribes person in the Amazon rainforest and lives off of fruit and grubs and lizards and whatever they eat there, should that person have the same gut flora makeup? Should their buggies in the colon be the same as, let's say, a First Nations person from Canada who lives up in the Arctic, or some other Arctic dweller who lives on like fish and whale blubber and seal blubber or whatever they eat up there? Or even someone in a temperate zone, like someone in whatever. How do we know what a healthy biome is or what an optimal biome is? I don't think anyone does, first of all. And I think it's very dependent on your diet, because what you eat is primarily what's going to determine the bugs in your gut. So to say that eating these artificial sweeteners has negative effects on the biome or adverse changes, how do you mean that? What exactly is negative about what's happening? What exactly is adverse about what's happening? Just because there's been a change, just because there's been a shift in the composition of the flora, either the specific types of species that are there or their relative numbers or proportions, just because there's been a change doesn't mean it's for the worse, doesn't mean it's bad. So I am not completely dismissing this as a field of study, but I just think anyone using that gut biome argument as a reason to avoid artificial sweeteners I just don't think there's a whole lot of solid science to back that up yet. Maybe there will be someday. Right now, it's not something I would hang my hat on. I'm far more concerned with blood sugar and insulin, and also with the cravings, like I said earlier. And that's something else we wrote about in End Your Carb Confusion, was that we absolutely don't fearmonger about the sucralose and the saccharin and the erythritol, because so many people can include these things. And the fact is, if being able to drink a diet soda once a day or twice a day or a couple times a week, or being able to have Crystal Light, or being able to have I don't even know what, like that sugar-free syrup, the flavored syrups in your coffee, or being able to have sugar-free ketchup or sugar-free barbecue sauce that has allulose or stevia in it. If being able to have those, fake sugar, fake sweetened items is going to be the difference between you actually being able to do low carb or keto and stick with it long term versus not, then have those by all means, by like all that's holy, have them. Because you are going to be even if you are a little sensitive to some of that stuff, you are still going to be better off having those lower carb versions of all that than you are the real thing, where we know for certain it's going to have a bigger effect on you. So mostly the reason that we encourage the total carbs or cutting all of that sweetened stuff out altogether is not so much the metabolic effects as it perpetuates the addiction. It perpetuates the sweet addiction. Whereas a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people find that once they go keto or low carb, and they're really strict, they kind of, let's say for the first month or so, they don't eat any of that artificially sweetened. They're just having meat and vegetables, maybe some nuts, cheese, whatever. They find that they actually genuinely lose the desire for something sweet. And I know that sounds like fantasy land. That sounds like there's no way that could ever happen. It does happen to some people, not everyone. But anyway, the point is, if you keep feeding that beast, keep feeding the sweet beast, feeding it, it keeps coming back. You're just perpetuating the craving for more and more sweet, even if you are using keto sweets or, low carb friendly sweeteners. But, and that's fine if you are not having a problem from those things. It's fine. If you're addicted to sweet, but you're not having any negative effects from the allulose or the Splenda or the stevia, you can be addicted, no problem. But if it is causing you issues, then you kind of need to break that addiction, because it's standing in the way of you getting to where you want to go, whether that's weight loss or, better blood sugar, blood pressure, all that stuff. So let's see. That was the biome. Yeah, I just think the biome is so not something I would use as a rationale for including or not including anything in your diet, frankly, not just, low carb friendly sweeteners. So what else do I want to talk about? Okay, let's talk about the S word. I hate the S word, spike. People, I put stevia in my coffee and it spikes my insulin. I put erythritol in X food and it spiked my blood sugar. Or they'll just say, I heard stevia spikes insulin. I heard that aspartame spikes blah de blah. Compared to what? Compared to half a cup of maple syrup? Compared to a soda sweetened with high fructose corn syrup? Compared to spikes? First of all, how do you define a spike? Is a spike to you 5 points in your blood sugar, or is it 50 points? Spike, I hate that word. I hate it. Because you know what else spikes your blood sugar? A high intensity workout, especially if you are fasted on a ketogenic diet. If you are terrified of spiking your blood sugar, never, ever, ever work out intensely. Never, ever never be stressed out, never be in a really scared moment, which it would be nice if you never were in a scared moment, but never, ever, ever be in a tense moment if you don't want to spike your blood sugar, because that's exactly what happens. You hear the same thing with protein, spikes insulin. I have whole videos on this I could link to if I, am so inclined. A rise, a normal physiological rise is not a spike. So we've got to stop saying spike, and you could even do a little experiment. Why don't you get yourself a can of Zevia, at least in the US, that's the soda that's sweetened with stevia. I don't know if it's available outside the US or not. Get yourself a can of Zevia, get yourself a glucometer or a CGM, you drink that Zevia, do your little experiment, see what happens. Next day, why don't you try the same experiment with a regular soda sweetened with either high fructose corn syrup, or there's a lot of soda now sweetened with regular cane sugar. Either one, I don't care. Why don't you see which one of those spikes your blood sugar more? So stevia spikes anything compared to what? What else can I say? Yeah, and an impact. And an impact is not the same as a spike, right? Protein impacts insulin. Protein induces a very normal, expected physiological little rise in insulin. It is not a spike by any means of the imagination. So even if some of these keto sweetening agents do impact or have a little rise, you could either choose to avoid this stuff altogether, which is a completely legitimate way to go. Like, if you don't want to use this stuff, don't use it. I say all the time, it sucks to be an adult. One of the nice things about being an adult is that we have autonomy over what we eat and what we choose to eat. Like my friend Casey Durango from Go Keto with Casey says, no one gets a vote on what you eat. So if you would choose to craft your diet with none of these sweeteners at all, be my guest, go right ahead. but stop judging and shaming and condescending toward and looking down upon others who do choose to include these things. Even if they're including them knowing they might be a little bit better off without them. Maybe they would lose those last 5 pounds. Maybe maybe their A1C would drop 0.1 or 2% more. But including these things is making it so much easier and more sustainable for them to actually stick with low carb for years and years and years, versus I can't have any of this and it's going to be too hard. I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to fall face first into a pint of ice cream, not keto erythritol sweetened ice cream, the real thing. So, you might not be willing to make that trade-off. Other people might be. Stop judging and shaming and looking down on them for that. Somebody might say, you know what, I'm willing to be 5 or 8 pounds heavier than I'd like to be, because having my sugar-free barbecue sauce and having my whatever is making it so that this is my permanent way of eating, and I enjoy it, I'm comfortable with it. I'm restricted in that I can't eat whatever I want all the time, but I'm not so restricted that this is a hardship. I enjoy this way of eating, and I can do it for the next 40 years, versus I can't have anything ever that's the slightest bit sweet, and I'm going crazy and I hate it, and I'm forcing myself to stick to this, and in about a week I'm going to crack and I'm going to eat every carb in sight for the next 8 months. It's a very, very individual thing as to what's best for anybody. I am not saying that any of these are health foods. I'm not saying that Splenda is nutritious for you, or that aspartame is like benefiting you in some way. It's not. Like, don't misunderstand my message here. I'm just saying that these things can be helpful for those who want or need them. Now, technically, none of us needs them. We could live without them. We're not going to die if we don't have sweetened coffee, but again, there's people who this is make or break for them. This is the kind of stuff that's going to allow them to do this forever versus not even a chance. And so, what was I going to say? Sorry. Yeah, the other thing I'll say, I guess, is these sweetening agents are very, very controversial for a number of reasons, but one of the bigger ones is cancer, right? And this is specifically more with the artificial sweeteners versus the sugar alcohols or stevia or something like that. With the cancer concern, I think people are more concerned specifically about the sucralose, the saccharin, and the aspartame specifically, probably those three. And in the research that I've seen, it's just not convincing. And most of the medical doctors, the keto-oriented medical doctors I know, are not really fearful about this stuff at all. So many of the studies are animal studies where they are giving these animals like insane amounts, like amounts you could not eat in a lifetime. I mean, you probably could if you really tried. If it was your full-time job to consume aspartame, you could probably do that. And I'm not saying these are health foods, but I'm saying I think that the fear-mongering around these things is kind of unwarranted. And if you want to avoid them, because thanks to things like stevia and erythritol now and allulose, there are versions of just about everything that you can make without using the sucralose, the saccharin, or the aspartame. There's liquid, like liquid stevia now that's really good for putting in beverages if you would normally use Splenda or Sweet and Low in your coffee or something. There's all kinds of liquid sweeteners that don't have that stuff in it. And I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by the potential cancer connection with the sweeteners. I'm just not convinced. And I know that's probably not convincing you, just me stating my opinion that I'm not convinced. But I mean, if I use that stuff, and I'll probably get a lot of ugly comments and negative comments, I don't really care. I use this stuff. I've been using it since my very first days of low carb in like 1998 when I first read Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution. I hope I can call her a friend, my friend slash colleague Jackie Eberstein, who worked with Dr. Atkins for 30 years at the Atkins Center in New York. I've seen her put Splenda in her coffee and tea. So, Jackie, there's few people on earth who have more clinical experience helping people with low carb diets than Jackie Eberstein. And if she feels perfectly comfortable putting a pack of Splenda in her beverage, then who am I to argue with it? What else can I say? Yeah, I use sweet and low in my coffee almost every day, except if I'm at a coffee shop where that's not available and they only have like sucralose, but sweet and low is the saccharin. It's just the one I prefer in coffee. It gives my coffee kind of the exact level of sweetness and whatever other taste profile that I'm looking for that I don't really get from stevia or allulose or anything else. And that's so yeah, I use that stuff. I've been using it for over 20 years. I'm not worried about it. Like of all the things I'm concerned about on a low carb or ketogenic diet, that's pretty low on the list. I think I've covered everything. So yeah, a little shy of 40 minutes here. So as with everything, you do you. Do what works best for you. Do what you're most comfortable with in terms of any potential health risks that you feel you want to mitigate against just in case. But don't extrapolate what works for you and what you're most comfortable with what someone else is going to be comfortable with, or with what someone else is going to what's going to work for somebody. Everything is so individual with this. Is there anything else I can say? I knew there's something else, but I'm kind of losing my train of thought. Just respect that it's a very individual thing, and what's best for you and most enjoyable to you is not necessarily going to be best or most enjoyable to someone else. And I will say, here's the thing that I forgot. When I said, don't automatically fearmonger with somebody else. Like, oh, you shouldn't eat that. Like someone who's brand new to keto, oh no, you can't have Splenda. Oh no, you're not allowed to have that. You shouldn't have that. First of all, shut up unless they've asked you for help. If they've asked you for help, that is where you can start maybe chiming in with some of your personal experience. You can say, a lot of the keto books tell you that Splenda's fine, but I found for myself, I lost weight more easily without the Splenda. That's all you can really say. You can say, you shouldn't have Splenda. Splenda's not allowed. Hey, you know what? I know a lot of other people do perfectly fine. I found that when I dropped the Splenda, all of it, I lost 3 pounds that week. Or, I know they say you can have diet soda and it's not a problem, but hey, aspartame gives me migraines. Aspartame gives me a gout flare, whatever the thing is, but just make it clear that that's your experience. Hey, I know tons of other people that do keto and they drink diet soda and it's no problem, but I know when I drink an aspartame soda, I get a headache, but I can have the Zevia that has stevia sweetening instead. If someone is specifically stuck in fat loss or their blood sugar, then you can say, all right, well, walk me through like a week of your diet. Walk me through all your meals and beverages for a few days. What do you typically eat and drink? And if you're hearing, well, for breakfast with my coffee, I have a Quest cookie, and then I have a Quest bar for my 3 p.m. snack, and I'm having, whatever else, for dessert every night, I have my almond flour cookies. And I'm not trying to bash Quest. Like, I enjoy their products. They actually sponsor a lot of important research. I think they've paid for some of Dominic D'Agostino's research. They may have paid for some of Dr. Jeff Volek's research. Don't quote me on that, but I know that they have funded some research. And I've eaten Quest products myself. I love Quest. But I just know that their products are high in net carbs, high in total carbs, low in net carbs. That's kind of the example of like the bar I was talking about, where it's maybe 25 total carbs, 2 or 4 net carbs, because you're subtracting all the corn fiber and these sugar alcohols that they use. So if somebody's specifically like kind of having trouble getting to where they want to go on keto, and they have asked you for help or asked you for some advice, then you can say, oh, I know that cookie says it's only 2 grams net carbs, but I see that it's 30 grams total carbs, and some people do actually have a big blood sugar response to that maltitol. So maybe, cut these cookies out for 2 weeks and see what happens, or whatever. So that's where I think your personal experience and your insight can come into play. But I wouldn't offer it freely, like, oh, no, stay away from that, or oh, you should, none of that finger wagging, please. I'm begging you, don't be that person. And I guess that's it. 40 minutes. I will stop talking now. I probably forgot something, but hopefully 40 minutes was enough to cover 2 pages worth of notes, right? So again, to sum up, I'm not afraid of any of this stuff, especially the non-nutritive sweeteners, the artificial sweeteners. The sugar alcohols I'm a little more iffy on, just because they do have a different impact, and even if maltitol and erythritol and xylitol have their sort of defined glycemic indices or loads, remember that you will have a very individual, distinct response to those, that other people are going to have their own individual responses too. We all are going to respond a little bit differently. And supposedly erythritol is the most benign. Supposedly erythritol barely does anything to blood sugar, insulin. It's like not a thing compared to something like the mannitol or the maltitol, which are known to be more. But yeah, if you want to include them, include them. If you are not getting the results you want, consider whether they are a problem for you. Consider whether they are messing with your blood sugar and insulin, or really dig down and look at your diet. Maybe it's not the sweeteners at all. Maybe it's too much fat. Maybe it's too much food overall. Maybe you're just overeating on steak or pork chops or broccoli or whatever. There's so many different things. Maybe it's thyroid. I've only done like 1 million videos on that. 1 million, 3, the same, 1 million is the same as 3 videos. But yeah, so use these if you want. Don't use them if you don't want to. Don't fearmonger, but if somebody comes to you for help, bring it to their attention that it could be an issue for them. It's not automatically an issue, but it could be, and it's something that they should consider. That is it. I will see you next time, hopefully with a shorter video. Thanks for watching.